They were the personalities whom we loved on television and in cinema halls. They were smiling on magazine covers and their names were at the top of the marquees in America. However, then all at once they disappeared. Out of tragic endings to second acts of wonders, these are the stories of the lost child stars of Hollywood. Chapter 1: Bobby Driscoll, the boy who never grew up. Bobby Driscoll was not any ordinary child actor. He was the first child star to be contracted by Disney, voice of Peter Pan and the face of Treasure Island. His future looked unlimited with an Academy Juvenile Award at the tender age of 12 years because of his acting in The Window and So Dear to My Heart. Walt Disney himself was like his father to Bobby and the world lay at his feet. But puberty hit Bobby hard. His angelical features, which were his best property, started to alter. His skin was scarred by acne and his features had grown manly. After Treasure Island, Disney ended his contract abruptly in 1953, only 3 years afterwards. Disney dropped him as washed up at 16, descending into a deep downward spiral of drug addiction and low-level crime. When his growing problems got to a point where his parents did not know what to do, he was taken to a rehab center, but it was not of much help. At a young age of 22, he was addicted to heroin. He was arrested several times and he was totally out of the industry which had previously glorified him. The last chapter of the life of Bobby sounds as a Greek tragedy. In 1968, in the New York City, children who were playing in an abandoned tenement building found a dead body of a man. He was interred in an unidentified pauper grave in Hart Island. Some 2 years later, his mother, who lost contact with her son, asked the NYPD to reopen their case on his disappearance. The heartbreaking reality was proved by fingerprints records. The corpse found was that of Bobby Driscoll, who died at the age of 31 due to heart failure, which was a result of prolonged use of drugs. That former flying boy, Peter Pan, spent his days alone in oblivion and disappearance. Chapter 2: Margaret O'Brien, the girl who walked away with grace. Margaret O'Brien's story, unlike the tragic story of Bobby, has a more optimistic end. She charmed crowds with her emotion as a child in movies such as Meet Me in St. Louis alongside Judy Garland. Her acting as Tootie Smalls won her an Academy Juvenile Award of Distinction, and the talent to cry on command would make her one of the greatest child assets of MGM. In the early 70s, however, the pace of the career of Margaret had slowed considerably. The role of cute kid turned into a role of a teenager, and there was not enough of them. Instead of going after fading opportunities, Margaret made a deliberate decision to leave Hollywood behind. The next thing that occurred was not expected of the child star. Margaret shifted her energies to learning and personal life. She got married, concentrated on family, and only emerged every now and then in her TV and theaters without even trying to restore her lost glory. Margaret O'Brien, now aged 87, is a retired Californian. Contrary to most of her contemporaries, she has been very frugal with her money and is one of the few living people who can trace back to the golden age of Hollywood. She also turns out at film festivals where admirers learned that she had never lost that sweet heart that brought her close to audiences more than 8 decades ago. Chapter 3: Claude Jarman Jr., the boy who had pursued educating rather than fame. In the natural performance of the 12-year-old Claude Jarman Jr. as Jodie Baxter when the yearling premiered in 1946, the critics and the viewers were spellbound. His true-to-life performance as a boy and a pet deer won him an Academy Juvenile Award and appeared to bring him a long and prosperous career. But by the early 1950s, Claude no longer appeared in marquees. Contrary to most child stars that have been kicked out of the business, Claude had the strange decision of leaving Hollywood on his own accord. Being a teenager, he was aware the education could be more stable than the unstable film industry. Upon featuring in fascinating movies such as Intruder in the Dust, Claude went back to Tennessee where he completed high school to hang around with people rather than in film sets. Upon graduation, Claude went to Vanderbilt University, joined the Navy, and later moved to San Francisco and served 15 years in the San Francisco International Film Festival as an executive director. At age 89, Claude Jarman Jr. leads a good life with his family, and he still has been interviewed a couple of times over his short yet meaningful contribution to the history of cinema. Chapter 4: Deanna Durbin, the star who walked away from millions. Not too many child stars would get the international popularity that fell on Deanna Durbin in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Her image and her soprano voice were considered one of the most profit-making stars in Universal Studios, as they are said to have rescued the studio that was on the verge of bankruptcy. At the young age of 21, Deanna was the second most paid woman in America, earning $400,000 per film. However, just when Deanna was at the very top of her career, she came out with an outrageous statement. She completely retired out of film at the tender age of 27 years. Deanna voluntarily resigned a $200,000 per year contract, unlike other stars who were forced out by shifts in taste. Deanna Durbin disappeared in 1949, having finished her 21st movie. She relocated to a small village near Paris, got married, and in the next 64 years, almost all the interview requests were refused. Asked sometime later what she had done, she said one of the few things she had never said: "I was never happy in Hollywood. I was not able to cope with the unrealisticness of the life which I was supposed to live." Deanna spent her later years in France, where she died in 2013, aged 91, her vanishing into obscurity being, to date, the most dramatic self-imposed Hollywood exodus in history. Chapter 5. Brandon DeWilde, the voice that haunts the cinema. Brandon DeWilde, with his blonde hair and expressive blue eyes, enchanted hearts in Shane, and with the memorable phrase in history of the movie, "Shane, come back." His acting won him a nomination at the Academy Awards at the very young age of 11 years, and he was one of the youngest nominees of all time. Having grown up in the movies, unlike most child actors, Brandon made it to teenage roles in movies such as HUD with Paul Newman and television series. His ability appeared to bring him a long and prosperous career as an adult actor, but fate had other plans. On July 1972, Brandon was on his way to Denver, Colorado when he lost control of the car in which he was driving and hit a construction truck. His bright future was taken away at a very young age of 30. The boy who had previously demanded the coming back of Shane would never go back to the screen himself. In the opinion of critics, Brandon could have been one of the best character actors of his generation. Instead, his filmography has not been updated since 17 films, which is not much but a considerable legacy. Chapter 6. Shirley Temple, the biggest star who reinvented everything. There is no place to begin a discussion about child stars than with Shirley Temple, who has become the household name of child actors in Hollywood. Her curling hair and her dimpled smile boosted the morale of Americans during the Great Depression on her own. In her early 7th year, she was making $50,000 a movie, or about $1 million currently. Even Shirley Temple had to encounter the cruel reality of Hollywood. Children grow up. When she grew up, becoming an adolescent, her box office attraction dropped significantly. When she reached 12, she was dropped by 21st Century Fox. Shirley left the movies at a very young age of 22 after a series of failed teenage roles. However, unlike most of the other child stars in the past, Shirley Temple Black has managed to craft her own second act into one of the most fruitful lives in American history. She became political after bringing up her children, a UN delegate, the US ambassador to Ghana, and subsequently to Czechoslovakia. Her experience in the diplomatic field was seen to be a testament to her abilities that went beyond dimpled grins. During her life, Shirley did not lose her dignity to the rest of the world and once said, "I would give one word of advice to those intending to become actors, and that is, don't." Her subsequent life service to the populace until her passing in 2014 proved that she had not left the Hollywood scene and was still able to make significant impacts to society. Chapter 7. Tommy Rettig, the first boy of Lassie. To millions of Americans who grew up in the 50s, Tommy Rettig was none more than Jeff Miller, the first boy who owns the famous collie in the Lassie television series. Having all-American looks, Tommy was called a household name and one of the most recognizable child actors of his time. It was not so simple in the case of Fame and Tommy. At 14, he was already restless in his role as a celebrity and requested to be released in his Lassie contract, abandoning what many thought was a dream part. Lassie life was difficult to live. The roles were few, and by his late teens, Tommy was virtually out of television. His grown-up life had been a messy journey, which included him being arrested with the possession of marijuana that further ruined his hopes of restoring his acting life. Finding it hard to fit in, Tommy rode through numerous occupations until he found himself in some other vocation as a computer programmer. He has been an early master of database programming, a respected software consultant and author. Tommy passed away in 1996 at the age of 54, and in the process had lived a dramatic life of reinvention. Chapter 8. Diana Sarah Carey, the original child star. Silent cinema had its child stars long before Shirley Temple, with one of them being Baby Peggy. In a span of 1921 to 1924, this tiny actress produced more than 150 short movies, and by the age of 6, she had become a worldwide star. During her peak popularity, Baby Peggy had made $1.5 million a year, which provided for her whole extended family. At a horrible cost, though, came the stardom of Baby Peggy. Her father controlled her career with an iron fist, compelling her to work as many as 8 hours hours a day. She was not educated, had no age mates, and never saw a penny of her wages. Her career was ruined by 1925 because of poor management of her father. The baby Peggy was washed up by the age of 7. By the age of teen, she changed her name to Diana Sarah Carey, making it legal in order to forget the name she was exploited by as a child. Diana had led the life of relative anonymity before being rediscovered by film historians during her 70s. She passed away in 2020 at an impressive age of 101, being the final surviving major silent era star. She even later, when she grew up, became a writer and champion of the rights of child actors and made her traumatic past her levy on a better society. Chapter 9, Scotty Beckett, Tragic Fall of the Little Rascal. Scotty Beckett played one of the earliest Little Rascals in the Our Gang comedies with his trademark sideways cap and mischievous grin. He then later managed to cross over to feature films, where he portrayed younger counterparts of film stars such as Spencer Tracy. However, behind a bright on-screen character, Scotty had growing personal demons. The death of his father in the age of 14 put Scotty in a mental frenzy. At an older age in the late teens, he started a cycle of self-destructive tendencies. He was drunk most of the time and misused prescription drugs. In Hollywood, Scotty became unemployable by the end of 1950s. He entered a nursing home after a severe beating in May 1968. He was discovered dead after 2 days due to overdose of barbiturates when he was 38 years old. The difference between the innocent boy who used to entertain people during the Depression and the miserable person who committed suicide explains how harmful early fame can be. Chapter 10, Freddie Bartholomew, MGM's Ideal English Boy. Freddie Bartholomew was a child star in the 1930s, and there was none as refined and dramatic as him. By using his British accent and having an incredible range of emotions, he became the replacement of Shirley Temple at MGM, appearing in literary performances such as David Copperfield and Captain's Courageous. Family drama had been painful behind the success of Freddie. He was born to poor parents and sent to stay with an aunt who appreciated his potential. His biological parents came back when his career started catapulting him, and a nasty custody war followed due to the ability to access his income. Unvarying tastes by his adolescence diminished his castability, and MGM jettisoned him at 14. Freddie has reinvented himself, unlike many other former child actors, and he has entered the world of television advertising. He became an executive and award-winning director of the commercials. At the time of his death in 1992 at age 67, a great number of his colleagues were astonished to discover that the long-admired executive had been one of the most renowned children of Hollywood. Chapter 11, Jackie Coogan, the Boy Who Changed the Law. Jackie Coogan is also considered to be the first big child star in Hollywood. Charlie Chaplin discovered the 7-year-old playing in vaudeville, and he cast him in The Kid, where he was brought to fame overnight thanks to his instinct talent. At the age of 10, he had made some $4 million. However, that wealth would never flow to Jackie. Upon reaching 21 years of age and anticipating the level of income he was about to receive, he found out that his mother and stepfather had squandered close to all the income. Only $126,000 was left of the millions that he had made. The next court case that Jackie would face against his own mother resulted in the California Child Actors Bill, usually referred to as the Coogan Law, that mandates that a set amount of child performers' earnings be placed in secured trusts. Although Jackie still performed as an adult, the latter generations remembered him more as Uncle Fester in the Addams Family. His legacy is the preservation of law his tragedy brought to the future generations. Chapter 12, John Provost, Timmy in the Well. In 1957, John Provost came on to play Timmy Martin alongside Lassie and entered one of the most familiar roles of a child on TV. His exploits with the renowned collie kept the audiences entertained all over the world in 7 years. During the height of the show, John was getting over 2,000 fan letters per week. John left the series at 14 as a mutual agreement, as opposed to his predecessor Tommy Rettig, who left at the age of 12. Since the days of Lassie, John had to struggle as an ex-child star. Instead of trying to find an out of the diminishing opportunities, he decided to retire to Hollywood completely. John developed a real estate development career in Northern California after his college. John sometimes goes to nostalgia conventions these days, 74 years old, and published a memoir called Timmy's in the Well, jokingly in reference to a catchphrase that was not used in the series. His narrative corresponds to the healthier side of the child star axis, which is one that was happy enough to stay in the spotlight, did so voluntarily, and developed a comfortable adulthood beyond entertainment. Chapter 13, Bonita Granville, Nancy Drew to Business Empire. Benita Granville was initially recognized through playing mean children, with the most notable one being the scheming Mary Tilford in These Three, which earned her an Academy Award nomination at the young age of 13. Once she had established herself as a dramatic actress, she scored most successfully in her role as a teenage sleuth, Nancy Drew, in a series of films. Gathering the most successful of Hollywood pivots, Benita did it as her fame as a child faded. She got married to the oil millionaire Jack Rather, and they established the Rather Corporation, which was powerful. Then Benita became an executive producer, assisting in the development of the Lassie series, which was later to become starring John Provost and Tommy Rettig. The later achievements of Benita Granville Rather far surpassed her early acting career when she died of cancer in 1988, as she had developed into a strong business executive since having been a child actress. Chapter 14. Martin Stevens, the creepy child that vanished. Horror films and television have seen some of the most memorable and disturbing child performances ever made by Martin Stevens in the horror movie Village of the Damned and the horror film The Innocents as the possessed Miles. His knack of portraying otherworldly danger and being an innocent child made him one of the most unique child actors of his time. Martin, in spite of his obvious talent, had a very brief acting career. He had another few appearances, but when he was 16, he appeared on screen again and would have vanished out of sight. During the decades, the fans of horror films were wondering what had become of him. The reality was much more proletariat. Martin did a total opposite and became a successful architect. He has at times appeared in retrospective documentaries over the last few years concerning the classic horror films, but considers his early acting experience as an entirely closed book in his life. Chapter 15. Johnny Crawford, the son of the rifleman. Johnny Crawford, as the original Mark McCain on The Rifleman, played the classic Western son throughout 5 seasons. Viewers have seen Johnny develop on screen, as an immature boy develop into a young man. Johnny was more than just an actor, as he had a successful recording career in the early 1960s, where he had several singles that hit the Billboard Top 40. Johnny had been typecast by his rifleman, and as it sometimes happens with television personalities, he was typecast. He still worked on in the 1960s and 1970s, but the opportunities faded away. Instead of pursuing Hollywood stardom, he transformed himself into a band leader playing ancient music of the 1920s and 1930s with his band. This music career brought him satisfaction in arts and a stable income even when he was very old. Johnny died in 2021 of Alzheimer's disease after being diagnosed in 2019, having led a life full of fame at a young age and of artistic activity at the end of it on completely different terms. Chapter 16. Jay North, the dark side of Dennis the Menace. There was no more recognizable child actor in the early 1960s than Jay North in the role of the naughty Dennis the Menace. The television show was in operation during 1959 to 63, and Jay was one of the most known children in America. However, the truth about his jovial character on the screen was much more sinister. Aunt and uncle, who were his guardians during the set, abused him emotionally and psychologically and threatened to punish him in case he failed to achieve perfection. In teenage years, Jay failed in the career he had started early in his life as the Dennis role. As the boyish Dennis, typecast as the rambunctious, he had a hard time locating suitable roles as a youngster. The psychological effects of his childhood fame and the abuse he had to endure produced a permanent scar. He had struggled with depression over a long period of time. Jay is now 73 years old, retired to the country, and at times he attends autograph shows. He has very openly discussed the mental burden of being famous at a young age, and this has brought about awareness of the specific difficulties that young performers face. Chapter 17. Gloria Jean, the singing star that moved on. Through her soprano voice and wholesome charm, Gloria Jean was briefly nurtured as a possible replacement of Deanna Durbin. Following her screen debut in 1939, she featured in a series of musical features, among them a series of films with comic actor Donald O'Connor. Although she had participated in more than 20 films before the age of 21, the career of Gloria started to decline in the late 40s. Gloria could clearly see the future, unlike many other performers who were desperately holding on to some declining fame. By the early 50s, she had dropped any form of entertainment altogether, getting employed as a hostess and becoming an executive receptionist. Her post-fame years were comfortable as she brought up a son and led a life totally opposite of what her former celebrity was. In her interviews several years later as to her choice to abandon entertainment, she showed no regrets, but was pragmatic in that when the time to move was over, she moved. Her passing in 2018 at 92 years got minimal media coverage, which speaks volumes about the extent to which she had abandoned the life of a celebrity. Chapter 18, Kevin Corcoran, Disney Moochie. The Disney fans of the 1950s and 1960s immediately identified Kevin Corcoran as the typical all-American boy, Moochie, who in many Disney productions such as the Spin and Marty series and movies including Old Yeller, The Shaggy Dog, and Swiss Family Robinson, Walt Disney had personal interest in his career. Contrary to various other child stars who find it very difficult to cope with the transition to adulthood, Kevin realized that his future could be in front of the camera. Having studied theater arts, he successfully became an assistant director and producer working on such shows as Quantum Leap and Baywatch. His career of being behind the scenes is rather more extended than the acting career. By the time of his death of cancer in 2015, at the age of 66, Kevin had a legacy of professionalism in two very different Hollywood professions, first as the dependable child star of Disney, then as one of the esteemed television producers and directors. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe to get more videos like this.